This year marks the 35th anniversary of the Legend of Zelda series. We've seen 16 main series games span across that time. One thing that has always stumped fans of the series, though, is how all the games fit together. In 2011, we got Hyrule Historia, which was the official Nintendo Zelda timeline, and then of course we got a couple updates a few years later, but it doesn't always fit together perfectly. But today is finally the day on another edition of A Cast to the Past, which you can get a brand new episode each and every Sunday and clips throughout the week on YouTube. It is finally the day where I talk about the Zelda timeline with Keith and help him try to figure out just what the heck is going on. So Keith, yes. I already kind of introduced you, but from London, Ontario, Mr. Hello. Keith Hamilton, today's the day.
You see, here's the thing, like I've made jokes about it in previous episodes, like I want to understand what's happening with this Zelda timeline so bad, and I've tried so hard with this. I've watched so many videos. I've watched your Zelda timeline breakdown at youtube.com/gameessays.
Thank you for the plug.
There's a plug. And I just can't wrap my head around it. Like, it's this weird, convoluted thing that I want to understand, and I'm actually making a solid attempt to do it, but my head just can't put one and one together. So I figured, hey, this is the platform to do it. It's you and me today. I've got the Zelda expert. I've got the Legend of Ryan himself, Ryan McNulty, and we are going to dissect this. You are going to teach me, I am going to learn, and we are not going to hit that stop recording button until I understand what the heck is going on in that, what did you call it, the Hyrule Historia?
Hyrule Historia was a document that basically, it was a book that came out for around when Skyward Sword came out, and it was a way to explain, they basically, like, it was an art book and it had a bunch of information, but there was sort of this like pseudo description of the timeline and how the games fit together.
So before that, it was just kind of a free-for-all. It was like, oh, they're just kind of these own individual things.
Yeah, it was a lot of speculation, and most people knew that there was this split in the timeline, and I'll get to all that very, very soon. But essentially, yeah, this was the thing that introduced us to a like third branch in a split timeline. So it gets ridiculous, but I'm going to explain how we got here. I'm showing here just a little bit on the video version of what the latest version of the official finger quotes, even though you can't see me doing finger quotes, Zelda timeline, just kind of giving you a little idea. But yes, it starts with Skyward Sword, but then Ocarina branches into 3 different timelines. How the heck did we get here? That's what I'm going to try and help Keith understand today.
Yeah. Let's start with what I think I have an understanding of, and you tell me how wrong I am.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, there's 3 timelines in the Legend of Zelda franchise. Yep. There's a split. It all starts in one place, and then they eventually split. The split happens in Ocarina of Time, which totally makes sense because, hey, that's probably the most important one of those, so why not make it the most important thing in the timeline?
Mm-hmm.
And then the split is because of the time travel in that game.
Yes.
And that's where it goes weird for me.
Yeah, so I think just to catch everybody else up before we get into the nitty gritty of it is, how did this all kind of start, right? If we look at the original Legend of Zelda that came out in the 80s, it has this backstory about kind of this fallen kingdom, and what you're playing in the original Legend of Zelda, which I'm actually doing another playthrough right now.
Where are you doing that playthrough?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot better than the first time I played the game. It's still a difficult game, and yes, I'm using a guide. But anyway, if you notice when you play through the original Legend of Zelda, there's no towns, people are hiding in caves, you have some dungeons, but it's clearly a fallen kingdom. And then Zelda 2 Zelda 2, you're in a like area above that, right? But Zelda 2 is a direct sequel. So immediately there's games, it's not like these are just two completely separate stories. It's not like Final Fantasy where they're completely unrelated. It's a direct sequel. It's the same Link. And like the Hyrule Kingdom has moved north, and that's kind of the area you're exploring in that game. So you have
you just
games.
like in Zelda 1, that town exists, but you're just like you haven't you don't visit that
exactly
part. Like you're down south for the winter and you're going back home for the summer.
Pretty much, because you actually, the way Zelda 2 is more like an RPG where, you know, like Final Fantasy, when you're walking around the map, it's like a way zoomed out version of the map. And
yeah, it's like a hybrid between Castlevania and like Final Fantasy kind of, right?
Yeah, well, think of like, okay, in Zelda 1, you're playing like the map is like the street view, right? And then Zelda 2's like Google Earth version, you know what I mean? Okay. Like you're way up above. And so you'll actually see like this, it's like a micro version of the Hyrule below it on the map. But it's like a very minimal part of the game. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
And we're still on all three timelines at this point with these two games.
Well, yeah, what I'm trying to do is take you kind of through the years a little bit of like how the timeline came together and why people have always been piecing the games together is because they've always been related.
Okay.
So yeah, we're on a singular timeline right now because we have Zelda 1 and we have Zelda 2. Direct sequels, no argument from pretty much anybody that's how it goes together. But then A Link to the Past shows up, and that is a prequel to the original Legend of Zelda. Right? So we have A Link to the Past. There's this established Hyrule Kingdom, right? There's you play in Hyrule Castle at the beginning of the game.
Yes.
So you have A Link to the Past, you have Zelda 1, you have Zelda 2. Completely perfect.
Gotcha.
Link's Awakening happens, and we can think of this as like the side story for A Link to the Past's Link, right?
Okay. But this is the same Link still,
yeah,
right?
So A Link to the Past, Link.
Okay.
And Link's Awakening.
One dude.
So we have
one dude with pink hair.
Yes. Those two games are the same Link. A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. That is one Link. Then many years later, we have the original Legend of Zelda game with a new Link, and then Zelda 2 is that same Link. So we have two Links across 4 games.
All right.
Got it?
Yes. Okay. So pink-haired Link from A Link to the Past. Boy, we've got to get like a Link counter going on how many times we're going to say that word. He is a different Link than in Zelda 1 and 2. So he's like, Link to the Past, Link has died of old age at this point. We've moved on, and boom, we're at Zelda 2. Okay, I've got it so far.
All right, excellent. So the next game to come out is Ocarina of Time, and that's where things get tricky. But not quite yet, I suppose. So in A Link to the Past, this is the backstory that has just killed everybody in terms of theorizing. The backstory, when you boot up A Link to the Past, there's a thing called the Imprisoning War, which essentially is Ganondorf gets access to what is known as the Sacred Realm. And the only thing you need to know about the Sacred Realm is that's where the Triforce was.
Okay.
Ganondorf gets access to the Sacred Realm.
And that's different than like the place from A Link to the Past, right?
No, we're talking about the backstory to A Link to the Past. That's literally the scrolling text at the beginning of the game.
Okay.
So in that, like I said, this is called the Imprisoning War. Ganondorf gets access to the Sacred Realm. He makes a wish on the Triforce, but I think for some reason he wants to rule Hyrule, but I think because he's not pure of heart or something, I forget the direct reason. But it doesn't go according to plan, and essentially the Sacred Realm becomes the Dark World, and that's what we play in A Link to the Past. That Dark World, it's a mirror version, so he technically is ruling Hyrule, but it's like a Dark World version of Hyrule. And all these people that were trying to also get the Triforce's power flooded into the Sacred Realm with Ganondorf, and those turn into the monsters. But that is basically what's happening, is Ganondorf still technically controls the full Triforce, but he is stuck in the Dark World. But he like creates Aghanim to be in the Light World to try and basically get the maidens and all that stuff to get himself out and rule the actual Hyrule. So that's what's going on. But the Imprisoning War is that initial act of Ganondorf getting into the Sacred Realm to gain access to the Triforce.
All right.
Now, Ocarina of Time, if you think about it, is kind of similar to that backstory to A Link to the Past, but not exact, right? Ganondorf gets into the Sacred Realm. He gains it, like, because Link opens the door of time for him when he gets the 3 jewels that you get at the beginning of Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, that's like the young Link section of Ocarina of Time.
So Ganondorf gets in, but then he kind of rules over the regular Hyrule. But then at the end of the game, right, the sages seal him in the Sacred Realm. But he only has the Triforce of Power, though. That is the thing. Is at the end of the game, he only has the Triforce of Power, not the full Triforce.
That is the thing.
Yes. So there was arguments before any other games came out, like, is this the Imprisoning War that happens? Because this game clearly takes place before A Link to the Past. Because A Link to the...
Okay.
Yeah.
We need to pause.
Let's pause. Okay. There's a lot of information to disclose here. So yeah.
Yes. So let me run through my understanding here. So Ocarina of Time happens before A Link to the Past.
Yes.
And the thing that happens at the end of Ocarina of Time, and I guess it's at this point we should say we're probably going to spoil most of the Zelda franchise
Zelda
in this
game,
episode.
So buckle up.
And like details aren't like everything's on the table here. Nothing, everything's fair game. So when Link fights Ganon/Ganondorf at the end of Ocarina of Time, that's the Imprisoning War that they talk about in the like the scroll before A Link to the Past. So when the sages in the Ocarina of Time like seal him, and then you get that amazing picture of Ganondorf at the end of the game where he's like, "Ah!" and he's like scared. That's when he's going to the Dark World in A Link to the Past, or I guess the Sacred Realm, and then contaminating it into the Dark World that you see in A Link to the Past.
So at the time, that was the believed opinion, right? Because just the way things were set up, we didn't have any reason to think otherwise. So at the time, even though there's things wrong, like I said, Ganondorf doesn't have the full Triforce like he does in A Link to the Past. There was a lot of inconsistencies, right? But that was the accepted opinion. They were like, okay, they just took creative license with the, because the developers are making this up as they go along. Clearly,
exactly. This isn't the only time in video games this has happened. Yeah. Like the part that why we are doing this today is I understand some video game bullshit in my time. Like my favorite series is Metal Gear Solid. It is full of things like that where they just kind of stumble their way into, see, I told you so, or oh, they had it planned all along that way. Like, that is Metal Gear Solid in a nutshell. Zelda seems to be a lot of that, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, they were making up as they were going along, and they're retroactively trying to fit all these games together. But anyway, what ends up happening, we get Majora's Mask, and that is just a direct follow-up to Ocarina of Time. It has no real direct impact on the timeline for now, pretty much. Okay. And yeah, it's a little confusing with like how the future ends, because Link ends up at the end of Ocarina of Time. Link becomes a child again,
Yeah, like he basically Back to the Futures himself.
Yes, exactly. So I guess people might have theorized a split at this time, but I'll just get to it when we need to.
Yes, let's go like one by one here.
Okay. So now we get Wind Waker, and this is where the split has to happen, right?
Okay.
Because if you think about it, Wind Waker, you just played it. We just did a full review of it on the podcast, so go check that out.
Available in the archives at youtube.com/acastofthepast or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. Phenomenal game.
Yeah. So, Wind Waker, if you see the intro to that game, it is without question referencing everything that happens at the end of Ocarina of Time, right? The hero shows up, defeats Ganon, the sages seal him away, and then he reemerges. So it is perfectly describing, and they say the hero of time. The game literally mentions the hero of time. So they're talking exactly about Ocarina of Time. So how can you have Wind Waker happen and A Link to the Past? Because they're both supposed to follow up after Ganon's...
Well, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah. And basically, it's because there's a split. And A Link to the Past, we're just going to put that aside for a second.
Okay.
And there's Anuma, who's the director for Zelda, basically says that our Ocarina of Time has two endings, although it's later 3, I guess. We'll get to that. But
okay,
at the end of Ocarina of Time, you are adult Link, and you defeat Ganon.
You use the Megaton hammer. You do the business.
The sages seal him away. You're still 7 years in the future, and then Zelda sends you back in time. Not the Master Sword that you usually use, but Zelda herself uses the Ocarina of Time to send you back to your childhood, to a time even before the normal back and forth you're doing as a kid in Ocarina of Time. And then, like, basically right before you meet Zelda for the first time, you're sent back to that point in time.
So the Deku Tree is dead.
Yes,
at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And this is like right after you defeat you beat the Deku Tree dungeon and you go and meet Zelda. You're basically sent back to that time. So if that's happening, you got to think like DBZ, Future Trunks type of stuff.
Yeah. Is there still a portrait of Mario in Hyrule Castle in that timeline?
Yes, there is. And
perfect.
Even in the Ocarina of Time details. 3D, it's still there. So you got to think, let's say Zelda, she just sends Link back, right? Mm-hmm. So she's still sitting there with the Ocarina and Link is now gone from that time.
Yeah, because I guess she can't send herself back, right?
Yeah, so she does not send herself back because she has lived those years herself. So she doesn't need to. So life is moving on in this timeline, right? The one where Zelda, she puts the ocarina down and she lives her life. And that's in that timeline with no Link anymore. That is when Wind Waker happens. And that is when Phantom Hourglass, which is a direct sequel, and Spirit Tracks, which is a sequel to that. So that's known as the adult timeline, where Ganondorf was defeated in Ocarina of Time in the future, and then Link doesn't exist in it anymore because Zelda sends him back, and then we get Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks.
Okay.
No debate with those games. They all work together directly, purposefully. They were built as a whole story. So now we continue from, if we go to the child side, we talk about how Link was sent back to right before he met Zelda. So he has all the knowledge of everything he just did in that adult era, but he is sent back to his childhood, right?
Man, that's weird.
Yeah.
Wonder what the Hyrule lottery numbers were.
Yeah, because if you look at the end of Ocarina of Time, the very last shots of the game, you can see Link still has the Triforce on his hand. So it's like, we know he still has that courage and everything that he acquired, that he like gained through his whole journey. And then the events of Majora's Mask happen after that because Zelda and Link basically come together, and instead of collecting all the things and basically helping Ganondorf, they are able to basically get him captured before he can ever really do anything.
Okay.
So Majora's Mask happens, like I said, it doesn't really impact the story, but that it happens with Child Link after he's sent back.
So that's where the split happens,
Yep.
right? So this is now
The child timeline where
like this is the Link that Zelda sent back. Now
Yep.
he is living his life as a child, and then Majora's Mask happens. The moon's like, "Hey,
Yep.
I'm done with this place."
Exactly.
And then we make a crappy game out of it.
So that is exactly what happens. And then Twilight Princess is the next game to follow up from Majora's Mask.
And is that the same Link?
No, it is a
regrown?
It is a different Link. It is a completely
Okay.
different Link that you're playing as in Twilight Princess. And that is where you see the execution of Ganondorf, that whole scene where he's being executed. That is basically, that cutscene is happening shortly after Ocarina of Time. Some years where basically, like I said, Zelda and Link, Ocarina Link, basically snitch on Ganondorf, and then they're going to execute him basically for his attempted coup, essentially, right?
Okay, so let me wrap my head around this. So Link goes back in time.
Mm-hmm.
He's the kid. Majora's Mask happens, and then once he deals with that, he's like, "Hey, this Ganondorf guy. This is what's about to happen." And then they execute him, and then send him to the Twilight Realm. Is it called? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the sages and everything at Arbiter's Grounds that does that. It's not really directly Ocarina Link that. Basically, he leaves it up to the justice system of Hyrule to take care of him.
Man,
I don't.
That Hyrule justice system is ruthless.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's like Ganondorf actually tries like a coup and then is executed, or if it's some Minority Report pre-crime stuff that they're doing. Like he doesn't.
Because if it's just going off like the word of probably a teenager at that point, like man, maybe we should have found a little more
Ganondorf
evidence
was
before.
done dirty a little bit there, but anyway, Twilight Princess is an entirely new Link, but the hero's shade, the guy who gives you the sword techniques, that's actually like the skeleton dude that gives you the sword techniques in Twilight Princess. That actually is Link from Ocarina of Time, but because he is of the same bloodline.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, that's just a little fun fact. It doesn't really impact anything.
No, it doesn't. It's cool to know what happened to that Link, and it seems like he also got done dirty because now he's like a sword fighting bone pile.
Yep, pretty much. And then Four Swords Adventures, they just kind of stuck it after Twilight Princess. It doesn't really make sense, but it's not really worth talking about. Okay. So where does this third split happen, right?
Yes.
This was basically, most people didn't think there was a third split, and they tried to fit A Link to the Past after Twilight Princess and everything, but it never, there was always a lot of inconsistencies. Anyway, once we got Hyrule Historia in 2011, that's where the third split was like what they came up with, and that was the hero is defeated timeline, which is almost it's a kind of a what if scenario. Basically, they're saying if Ganon just kills Link in Ocarina of Time at the end, then that is A Link to the Past follows after that.
So is that what that second ending is? That quote unquote second ending is supposed to be, even though it's not in the video game at all?
They basically said, okay, Link dies, then Ganon is able to get the full Triforce, and then he gets sealed, and then the Dark World happens and all that. So it's like he defeats Link, I guess defeats Zelda, or gets the Triforce piece from Zelda, so he has the full Triforce, but the sages are still able to seal him. And then Dark World, etc. happens.
Man, those sages seem like they kind of slept on the job there.
Yeah, maybe they should have sealed him earlier. I don't know why they don't, but whatever. So, and then all the games we talked about, like Link's Awakening, we didn't talk about the Oracle games, but they all fit there. Zelda 1, Zelda 2, they're all in that what if. So the earliest games that came out...
That kind of feels like the dumpster pile of like, we don't know what to do.
Actually
know.
A Link Between Worlds fits there too, just because it's so closely related to A Link to the Past. But again, that's a different Link, but they just kind of fit it over there. But again, it's not like important to knowing these three splits. But basically, the real reason that third split exists is because they made a Link to the Past. They had this backstory, and then they wanted to make that backstory into a game, but they had inconsistencies because they wanted it to be a game, right? Because in the backstory of A Link to the Past, there's no hero. But they were like, hey, that backstory's cool, but we're going to turn it into a game. But because we need Link to win at the end, it's not going to line up right. So they basically messed up, and the only way to fix it was to just have this heroes defeated timeline. And then they just, they just abandoned it and said, okay, whatever, we're just going to throw all these games here that don't really fit. And then kind of the child and adult timelines where we have Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, that's like where things are a little bit smoother because we were thinking more about the timeline at this point.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
And I might be shooting myself in the foot with this question, but I need to know. Why does, because in that timeline, when Ganon defeats Link, and then he gets sealed away, that's when he becomes Pig Ganon, right? Like, that's the only time that Ganondorf becomes the blue pig. Why does he become a blue pig?
The Triforce of Power is probably the biggest reason.
Okay.
But I guess he can, change back and forth between it, because we've seen in Twilight Princess, right, he turns into the beast form, but then you fight him in his Ganondorf form at the end. So I assume he just stays in it just because he wants to. But yeah, and then I don't know, when he dies and gets resurrected multiple times within that, between A Link to the Past, the Oracle games, and Zelda 1, I don't know, he just stays in his pig form. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of just like a retcon where originally he was the pig beast, and then they always had him as the pig beast, but then Ocarina wanted
they needed something cool.
I mean,
for Ganon.
A Link to the Past talks about Ganondorf, but you just never see Ganondorf. But Ocarina is when you actually see Ganondorf for the first time. But I don't know. I think they originally planned was the original idea was that Ganondorf becomes the beast in Ocarina of Time, and that was to explain that he stayed the beast from then. But they kind of just decided that he can kind of go back and forth if he wants to.
So there's no real answer.
Yeah, there's no real answer. It's just retcon and weird stuff. I don't know.
Fair enough. So there's one game you haven't mentioned yet that I consider to be a tentpole, and then it's funny enough, it's getting re-released soon, and that's Skyward Sword. Where does that fall in everything?
So Skyward Sword,
because that's about making the Master Sword, right?
Skyward Sword is the easiest one because they were very clear. It is the beginning. It is very beginning before a split occurs. It's the earliest game in the timeline. The people of what would become Hylians live in the sky. It is about the creation of the Master Sword.
Are they called Skylians?
No, they're not. I think they're called Skyloftians, maybe. Correct.
Okay. I was
in the
making
comments
a
correct
joke,
me if I'm wrong on that. Yeah, but they should have been. That might have just been a little bit too cheesy. But yeah, so that is the origin of the Master Sword, and then at the end of the game, they all Skyloft basically comes down to the Earth, and they decide to live on the Earth again or whatever. And then of course we didn't talk about Breath of the Wild. And that one, it's still kind of up in the air, but basically Breath of the Wild, they just said, hey, this game is way in the future, so it shouldn't really matter. Because it references all three timelines, and people just...
Oh, good.
Yeah. And so people still don't know for sure, but it seems like they just kind of wanted to distance themselves from the timeline and then just say it happens way in the future. So there's no confirmed placement for Breath of the Wild, but do
you think that's something they're going to go into more with Breath of the Wild too? Because it's even in that teaser that we've gotten where you see corpse Ganondorf, that assumes that hey, he got stabbed at some point, right?
Possibly. Yeah, a lot of people do think it's potentially in the same timeline as Twilight Princess, but honestly, I feel most of the time Zelda, each game likes to come up with its own history. Every game has this history to it that's kind of separate from all the other histories. They always like to kind of do their own thing for each game. So it wouldn't surprise me if there is some like Ganondorf backstory that is like unique to this game that people will try to fit with all the other games.
And then we just get the fourth timeline.
Yeah, the only game I feel like it's going to be heavily like related to is obviously Breath of the Wild. I think those games will obviously have a lot to do with each other, and this will probably maybe talk about like how the calamity version of Ganon maybe came to be. That's what I expect. I don't expect it to hint towards Twilight Princess or Wind Waker or Skyward Sword. I mean, maybe a little bit of Skyward Sword because they had a little bit of that in Breath of the Wild, but I don't expect this to give us any new information as to where like both of those games will actually fit.
Okay.
I think we did
it. And that's it?
Yeah, I mean, there's other games mixed in there, but they're not super important to like the overall landscape. The big thing is understanding that split.
I'm going to crack my knuckles here. I don't know if the microphone picked that up. It's test time.
Okay.
For me. Let's see how I do here. Let's see how much of that I gathered.
All right. So
it
go for it.
Everything starts at Skyward Sword.
Mm-hmm.
We're on all three timelines here.
Yep.
And then Ocarina of Time happens.
Yeah, and there's some games in between like Minish Cap and Four Swords, but again, not super important.
Yeah, you'll just screw me up with that stuff. So I appreciate you not bringing it up.
We go right to eventually we get to Ocarina of Time.
All right, so we're at Ocarina of Time now. And that's where the split happens. This trident-like split. And I'm going to go through each one of them and let me know if I'm right. So you have scenario number 1, where Ganondorf is defeated, and then Link is sent back through time. Zelda does her magical ocarina powers. Link goes back. He's a kid again right after the Deku Tree dies, and kind of quote unquote lives his life as a kid. Majora's Mask happens, and then that Link dies, and then Skyward Sword happens. Skyward Sword, sorry, Twilight Princess.
There you go.
Happens later in that timeline.
Yes.
And then that's it for that one.
Yes, basically, yeah. There's another game, but again, not important. Go ahead.
All right. So then that's number 1. Then we're on to number 2, where... Hold on. See, this is
doing good. You're doing good.
So Link stays... No. So Zelda still sends him back. Okay, I think I got it. So we're in Ocarina of Time. Ganondorf gets the Megaton Hammer. He's defeated. Zelda sends Link back still, but we're following the story of Zelda instead of Link now, right? Like, now, this is the same world that Zelda's in.
Yes.
Like, this is Ganon's castle in ruins at the end of Ocarina of Time.
Exactly. That timeline is when Wind Waker eventually happens.
Yeah, so then Wind Waker happens. That's still the same Ganondorf. He gets beat again. And then after that, you get Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, those DS games, and that is where that one ends. That's number 2.
Yes.
All right.
You're
then
doing
we
good.
have the third one, the imaginary one, the one that we're gonna call this the miscellaneous pile.
Yeah, they call it the down. It's called the downfall timeline.
Yeah, the only downfall was them trying to retcon it in. It seems like so,
pretty much.
Even this is a quote unquote. We're back at Ocarina of Time. This is a quote unquote alternate ending that isn't actually in the game.
Yes.
And Link is defeated. Zelda is defeated. Ganondorf gets all 3 pieces of the Triforce, tries to rule Hyrule, but instead gets the Dark World. A Link to the Past happens, and then...
all the other games.
Oh, yeah, right. So it's A Link to the Past, and then you get your Zelda 1, Zelda 2, And that's it for that one?
Yeah, pretty much. That's the basic concept. Like I said, there's smaller games in there, like A Link Between Worlds and stuff, but as long as you understand that main concept, and
I think it's the thing that's always screwed me up every time I try and wrap my head around it. And thank you for explaining it so nicely today. I hope myself and anyone out there that's still listening to this, thank you, by the way.
You made it this far. Yeah.
Congratulations. I hope we've gone on this adventure together. But the fact that they have, they've turned fan fiction into an official thing, basically, because they're referencing a thing that doesn't actually happen in the video game that's in question. Like, I think that's what always threw me off.
Yeah, it's all because they tried to make a game based on a backstory of another game, and that was just a terrible, terrible idea. And I think they learned their lesson, right? Because Age of Calamity is it's not a main series game. It's a Hyrule Warriors. It's like Dynasty
Warriors. Because there's time travel in that one too, isn't there?
Exactly. Because again, if you tried to tell the exact backstory of Breath of the Wild, it's gonna have a pretty depressing ending to the game. So they basically did again another what if scenario of, okay, what if we stop the calamity, basically, and that's kind of what you play in the game. One little thing I wanted to explain just to make sure you understand, because you were saying like scenario A, scenario B. There's technically two scenarios, right? So we talk about the what if scenario, but then the whole adult child timeline, that's all kind of one event happens, right? Ganon's defeated, Zelda sends Link back to be a child, and then the timeline where Zelda sends Link back, that just happens, and then we get Wind Waker, and then the child Link goes on to live his childhood in the other timeline.
I think that's DBZ, Dragon Ball Z, is really, I think, a good reference point for that, where it's like Trunks is going back to Trunks time, where everybody is dead and the androids are still there.
Exactly. It's exactly like Dragon Ball Z, and the timeline works the same way. Yeah, Trunks is able to go to another timeline and help stop the androids there, but then at the end he goes back to his timeline. So it's a similar thing where Trunks created a split timeline by basically traveling to another one and trying to change history. Similar concept. So you did it, Keith. You understand.
I did it. I think I understand this.
So that was the goal of this video.
In a week, you're going to have to pop quiz me and see if it's stuck. But after here, we did 40 minutes later, I think I've got it. I think I finally understand what's going on here. Yeah, and for everyone watching, thank you for listening. And I hope that helps you guys understand a little bit better too, because sometimes videos go through pretty fast, but to have someone who's kind of learning it as we go, I think that definitely added something to it. And if you have a headache after this, don't worry, because I don't think it's going to be the biggest detail. This has been months for me. This has been months of Ryan trying to explain it. But I think with Breath of the Wild 2, it's not going to be this big focus. It's not going to be something you have to learn. It's not Kingdom Hearts 3 where you have to watch 40-minute YouTube videos to be caught up before you're able to understand the story of the game. Usually Zelda games are very good at being a very standalone scenario where even if you haven't played one of the direct sequels, you can still enjoy it without issue. But yeah, this has been a fantastic conversation. If you want to continue this conversation, you can absolutely join our Discord at castofthepast.com/Discord, where you can talk to me about Zelda. And, we have a few other people who are rabid fans of Zelda, like Girahim in our Discord. There's a lot of Zelda.
We got a lot of Zelda fans. Eric Evans, I know as well. So we have a lot of fun talking Zelda. So definitely feel free to join that or talk about some other subjects. We have plenty of food, pet blog, not blogs, but channels for conversations.
Exactly. Food. If you want to talk about movies, or share your game pickups or any sort of collectible out there, the Discord is a thriving community for that. And a very inclusive one where there's not a lot of negativity. And that's something that I'm very proud of with our community.
Absolutely. Very, very friendly. Everyone's willing to help each other out. So super, super cool. But that is going to do it for today's episode. Quick last minute plugs. Go follow Keith for some sweet Lego streams over at twitch.tv/BrickHouseHamilton. I also have my solo channel with plenty more Zelda content.
If you have just consumed this timeline and you're like, I need more Zelda, you need to head to youtube.com/gameessays and check out Ryan's phenomenal breakdowns of games, breaking down them in a review style format, or even just aspects of the series itself. Ryan's got a ton of great content over there, and I highly recommend you check it out.
I appreciate the kind words, but thank you for joining me in another edition of A Cast
to the
Past.
So what do you think happens in the timeline where Juan is defeated and
I think Juan will be defeated after listening to this.
It's true.
Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, and we are also available on podcast feeds, so search the name, click on the Sword and Stone, and enjoy a brand new episode every single Sunday.